Yeah, I'd like to introduce Jakobsjo as today's panelist on the introduction to Snowcapped. You'll have seen Jakobsjo on a worldgen panel that we had earlier this week on Monday, and that was a great introduction to worldgen. So we're going to continue that train onto their really cool tool for worldgen biomes and more. Jakobsjo also has a booth on the Smith Summit that you might have seen called Worldgen Tools. That's in the Aspen Forest area, I think. Yeah. So lots of cool stuff, but we can go ahead and get started. So take away the stage, Jakobsjo, and I'll be sitting in the audience.
All right, so hello everyone. I am Jacob Sir. I've been part of the Datapack worldgen community since the very start in 1.16. You may have already seen me on the worldgen panel. I mainly work on tools that help in development of worldgen datapacks. And one of those tools is Snowcapped. And this panel, I want to give you an introduction on how to use this tool, because it's not the easiest tool to use in the world. I've started work on Snowcapped already during the snapshot cycle for 1.18. So 1.18, as you probably all know, massively reworked how the world generation worked, and that included the biome placement. And this biome placement now uses a system called multi-noise biome source. That system had already been in use for nether biomes since 1.16, but 1.18 introduced it for overworld biomes, and that was so much more complicated than the nether that it was basically impossible to edit those by hand. So that is what motivated me to make Snowcapped, which is a tool specifically made to edit those complicated biome layouts. So, what is Snowcapped? Snowcapped is an online editor of those biome layouts. So as you can see here on the right, there's a map that displays the current biome layout that you are configuring. So you can actually see what you're doing while you edit them. And here on the left, that's the actual editor part, and you're basically editing where to place which biomes. And into the specifics of that, well, that's what this panel is about, so let's get right into it. So this panel will be split into two parts. The first part is a recap on terrain generation. So it's a recap of the panel on Tuesday, or rather a part of the panel on Tuesday, and it goes a bit more into detail of how this multi-noise system works. And then the second part, we will have a step-by-step guide on how you can create your own biome layout using Snowcapped. Let's start with a recap on terrain generation. And we do that by looking at some vanilla terrain first. So this is vanilla terrain. We see quite a few different biomes. And well, what we can really see here is that the biomes sort of match the terrain, right? So we have peak biomes on the mountains, and we have cherry grove biomes on plateaus and so forth. So if you now compare this with a single biome world, created with the same seed, what you can see is that the terrain is identical. So that is how terrain generation works in Minecraft. The terrain is generated first, and then the biomes are just painted on top of it. So if we want to now define where to place biomes, we have to make sure that the biomes are placed matching to the terrain. So here is a graph of how this terrain is generated. Basically, we have three noises: the continentalness, the erosion, and the weirdness. And those three noises are then combined using splines, basically a bit of math that combines them into an offset value. The offset value is basically just the height of the terrain at any given position. And then that offset is combined with some other things into the full final terrain that you find in Minecraft. So that was just the terrain. So let's take a look at the biomes. For the biomes, we add two more noises called temperature and humidity. And we combine them with the other three we already had, the continentalness, the erosion, and the weirdness. And we determine a biome based on all five of those noises. As you can see here, the biomes don't directly depend on the terrain or the offset value. Instead, we just use the same inputs as we've used for the mass of the offset value. So now we just need to make sure that we're placing the biomes in the same areas or the same combinations of those noise inputs, where we've put matching terrain in our splines for the offset value. And that's how we make sure that our biomes match the terrain. Technically, what I've just said is not quite true, because we have one more input called depth that we do get as an additional fixed input into our biomes algorithm. The way this depth is set up, it is 0 at the surface and then increases as we get deeper below the surface. So we can use this input to place cave biomes. But that is the only extent to which we actually use the terrain height to determine the biomes directly. A small note on this. The way I've shown it here on this graph is how it is done in vanilla. You can use density functions to modify all of this. You can use more inputs into your offset. You can use less. You can use different mass as inputs into the biomes algorithm. Whatever you choose what makes sense for your dimension. But for today's panel and the demonstration I'm about to give you, we'll stick to this vanilla way of doing this. So now all we need to do is pick which biome to use for each combination of those 6 inputs. So we're dealing with a 6D space here. It's maybe a bit daunting. So how do we handle it? In Snowcapped, we do it by dealing with 2 dimensions at a time. We start with layouts. Those layouts are just a 2D grid where you can define which biome to place based on the combination of humidity and temperature. So here, for example, we could place desert biomes in areas with high temperature and snowy biomes in areas with cold temperatures, and maybe some jungles in high humidity areas, and so forth. So now we've dealt with 2 dimensions. Let's deal with the next 2, erosion and continentalness. And so that's another grid. We call those slices. So slices are erosion and continentalness. And for each combination of those, we define either which biome to place or which of those humidity and temperature grids to place. So we can choose a layout to put into each of these grid slots of the slices. So in those grid slots, we don't just put biomes, but we put entire layouts. So there are multiple layouts, and we can decide which layout to use for each combination of erosion and continentalness. So now we've dealt with 4 dimensions. So let's deal with the last 2. We do it in the same way, obviously, by adding another grid. This one is just called the Biomes grid because there's only one of those. It's based on weirdness and depth. Now, for each combination of weirdness and depth, so in each cell, you can decide which slice to place. So, just to summarize again, we start with this Biomes grid, and depending on weirdness and depth, we decide which slice to use. And then we go to that slice and use the erosion and continentalness to decide which layout to place. And then we go to the layout and use humidity and temperature to decide which biome to place. So that is the basic idea behind Snowcapped. But now you are probably wondering how you are actually defining those layouts and how it works in practice to align those to terrain and so forth. And that's what the remaining of today's panel is about. So the remaining of this panel is going to be a step-by-step guide to creating a new biome layout to match some terrain. Now, doing that for the entire vanilla terrain would take way too long. So what I've done is I've created a simplified terrain where I've removed things like settled valleys, and swamps, windswept terrain, and a lot of things. So it's much simpler now. So that we'll be able to paint the whole terrain with biomes properly in the remaining time of today's panel. So let's take a simple look at what the terrain looks like that I've created. So Here we can see it's still a single biome world with plains biomes. Well, you can see a lot of flatlands, a few rivers running through it, a large body of water that might be an ocean on the right. And there are also some mountains that we don't see on this screen right now, but that we'll be able to see later. And if you want to follow along with my example today, you can download this simple terrain data pack from my GitHub on the URL you can see on screen here. If you are following along, maybe you will need to pause from time to time, but that's fine, I guess. Alright, now let's start. So when you open Snowcapped, the first thing you see is this vanilla layout. We don't want that today. We want to start with an empty preset. So we go to New Empty on the top. And then we immediately enter the settings, the settings button on the top. And we click that zip button there to add our data pack. So we click that button and then we select data pack, and you can see on the right there that it immediately changed the visualization. So basically add the data pack so the visualization knows how to interpret the data, the inputs, and show a proper visualization. You don't need to add data pack, but it is of course helpful to have a proper visualization. So let's go back out of the settings. This is the biomes grid. Well, it's one by one for now, and we just have plates. Ignore that A symbol on top there. We'll get back to that near the end of the panel. Anyways, so let's add some biomes. We do that using a layout. Well, let's start with a layout. So we click that plus button next to the layer in the layout section, and we'll give it a name. In this case, we pick the name middle because that's what Mojang calls their layout of normal flatland biomes. And so, right, we have this one by one humidity temperature grid that we really want to extend now. So we'll click this grid button in this layer in the layout section, and that will open our layout editor. The layout editor just allows us to add separations. So we click this plus on the temperature side, and that creates two separate sections. We click it again, and then we have three, and then we can use our mouse to move them around to specific values. So the cutoff values, the cutoff between two biomes is at the values that we want. We can use whatever we want here, and then right, we go back to our layout. So that is right click to open this layout, and then we have a list of biomes below. We can use a search bar to search for any biome we want. And then we left click on a biome to select it for painting, and left click again on a grid cell, and then we can paint our biomes. And now we want to do the same with humidity. So we go back to our grid editor and click the plus on the humidity side this time, click it again, and create three separate columns, and then we can paint some biomes. And now if you look at the map on the right, it already looks quite good, or on a first glance it would look quite good. So let's see how it looks in game. So how do we do that? Go back to our settings and then just click that download button on the Snowcapped data, and that just downloads a data pack that you can directly add to your world and it will work. You need to remember that you also want to add some simple terrain data pack because that isn't included in the download here. You also should remember that Snowcapped can't re-import this file that you downloaded there. So if you want to save it to continue working in Snowcapped later, you should use the save button on the top. Right, so we've downloaded the Datapack, and then let's see how it looks in game. So this is the single biome world we had before, and now it's with some biomes. I'd say that looks quite decent. But you immediately realize some issues. First of all, there is this large body of water on the right. We haven't actually placed an ocean biome there. So this is just some forest biome that doesn't generate trees because there's water. So let's do that next. Let's place some ocean. And while we're at it, also add some beaches in between. So how do we do that? Well, so this is the first time where we want to place biomes that depend on the terrain. So for that, we need to figure out how the terrain generates. So if you look at the map here on the right, you can see these large areas where the terrain is pretty low, but we haven't placed any ocean biomes yet. If you look at the values below, you can maybe tell, and I'm just gonna tell you now, these areas are where the continentalness value is very low. So we now need to place a biome depending on what the continentalness value is. So if you remember from the beginning, continentalness is determined by slices, was handled by slices. So we'll need to add a slice. So we click this plus button on the slice section on this left, and then we now have a 1 by 1 grid for the slices. So again, we want to edit the grid. So we we click the grid button, and we add the continentalness separation on the left by clicking the plus, and then we might want to add another one for the beaches. So we click this plus button again, and then we make a pretty narrow one because the beaches should be too wide. And then we go back to our slice. So again, that is right click to open the slice. And now we want to paint a layout into the slice. So we left click on the layout we want to paint. So left click is for painting, and remember right click would open the layout for editing. So left click for painting, then we left click on the grid slot that we want to paint in, and then we're painting more layout. And the other two grid slots, we just paint biomes directly because that's also possible. We just select the ocean and beach biomes and we paint them in there. And then on the right, you can see that it's roughly matching. Maybe we now realize that it's not quite matching, so we can go back into our grid and move these cutoff values so the biomes better match the terrain. Here we just move it very slightly so the beaches are a bit more narrow. So let's see how it looks in game. So this is how it looked before and this is after. So you can clearly see the beaches and maybe you can also make out the kelp and the large body of water. So there's actually an ocean biome there as well. All right, so what's left? Well, there's these rivers and we haven't placed any river biomes yet. So let's do that next. So in Minecraft, river biomes are placed at the areas where the weirdness value is 0 or close to 0. So if you look at this terrain, on one side of the river, you have positive weirdness values. On the other side of the river, you have negative weirdness values. And exactly where it's 0, that's where rivers are usually placed. So we need to place biomes based on the weirdness value. So how do we do that? Well, weirdness is defined by this biomes grid directly. So we go to this biomes grid. I have a 1 by 1 grid for now. So we want to extend that. So we open the grid editor for the biomes grid. The button is in a slightly different place, but yeah, press that biomes grid button, that one, and then we add some separation based on weirdness. And we add 2. So we have this river biome in the middle, or place river biome in the middle, just set it around 0. And the left and the right is space for normal biomes. So let's go back to our biomes grid, and in the middle we place a river biome. So we search for the river biome on the left and selection, and then we paint it into the middles. Yeah, it looks quite good, I would say, on the right. Well, except for this one issue where now our oceans are also split by rivers. Well, because we placed rivers everywhere where weirdness is near 0. and that would include the areas where there's ocean. So we need to make sure to not place rivers when the continentalness is low enough. So to do that, we need to add a new slice. So we click the slice button to add a new one. This time we rename it to river, so it's know what it's going on, and then we paint river biomes in the areas, in the inland areas, and an ocean biome in the low continentalness area. We don't see any change yet in the map on the right, and that's because we haven't actually used the slice in the biomes grid yet. So we go to the biomes grid and we select a rubber slice for painting. Again, it's left click and then we paint it. And you can see in the visualization, we don't have any rubbers splitting our oceans anymore. So let's see how it looks in game. So this is how it looked before, and this is how it looks now. But I've colored the river biome watercolor red, so you can actually see what's going on here. Maybe you can also see now, like the river biomes is pretty narrow compared to the water bodies, or how the terrain generated the rivers. So you might want to extend the range in which rivers are generated a bit. I think you have a rough idea how to do that now. I'm not going to do that now. You can do that yourself if you want to be a bit more precise in the river placement here. So let's continue with some other terrain. I'll fly around a bit in the world, and we've seen these mountains, and we haven't placed any peak biomes on those. And well, let's do that now. So again, for this we need to figure out the noise values for which the terrain generates the mountains. And for that we can actually use the map on the right in Snowcapped. Basically, if you select a specific position, it tells you specific values, specific input values on that position. So you can, for example, see that the weirdness value on this mountain is 0.66 or negative 0.66. And well, if you look around a bit more, you can figure out that any weirdness value at 0.66 and negative 0.66 is where mountains are usually placed. So, right, we need to place our peak biomes based on weirdness again. So that's basically what we've already done with the rivers. So we go into our biomes grid, we edit biomes grid, and we add some more separation based on weirdness again. So surrounding the 0.66 values, and then we paint our peak biomes there. Well, okay, we have the same problem again where the peak biomes generate in the ocean, so we need to add in a slice, and then we set the peak biome to the bottom cell, and then the middle cell. Remember, that is where we usually had the beaches, so we probably want to keep the beaches and the ocean in the top cell. So we could just paint those manually, but there's a small trick. You can actually also reference one slice from a different slice. So what we do that is by just left clicking the one slice we want to paint as usual. And then we can just paint that one slice into the other by left clicking on those cells. And then what we've created is a reference. And that means that in this specific cell, just use the same biome or the same layout that this other slice uses. So that helps if you in your future want to modify the normal slice, you don't have to remember to also modify the mountain slice. It will happen automatically. So, well, now we actually need to apply our mountain slice in our biomes grid. So, as usual, left click the mountain slice, paste it into the biomes grid, and then we can see, well, doesn't look quite right yet. The mountain still reaches all the way to the beach. So probably want to add a small section of just normal biomes between the beach and the start of the mountains. So it would be fairly easy. We just go to the slice grid again and we add another separation based on continentalness. And then we go to a mountain slice, and then by this middle section between the two, we still want to use normal biomes, so we still use this reference to the normal slice. So in this section, we still want normal biomes. Looks better, but if you look at this other area, well, there's flat areas, but we still placed the mountain biomes. So let's take a look again at what the noises are, or the inputs are doing here. And well, we can see that the erosion here is pretty high. And so high erosion clearly means flat terrain. So we actually want to not place mountain biomes in flat terrain or with high erosion rates. So in our slice grid, we need to add a separation based on erosion. So click that plus on top as usual, and we go to our mountain slice, and in this bottom right cell, so in the high erosion areas, we still want our normal layout. So again, reference to the normal slice, and then it looks quite good. Well, doesn't quite look correct right yet on the map, but that's just because we haven't quite tweaked these values, these scatter pipes correctly in this grid editor. So let's do that, and now it looks good. So that's basically just a bit of trial and error until the map looks good. All right, so let's take a look at our terrain again. This is how it looked before, and now let's see how it looks afterwards. And we have some snowy peaks. All right. Well, maybe you wanna play some slope biomes too. You should, I think, now have a rough idea of how to actually do that. Just add more separation based on weirdness value, and then add slope biomes in the areas near the peak biomes. Right. I'll leave that up to you though, because you wouldn't learn much new from that. Instead, let's take a look at some other terrain. So here we've run around a bit more, and now we're at a colder area. I haven't seen that before yet, but right, so it looks quite good, I would say, but maybe you can immediately see some issues. The ocean isn't frozen, but it's not a frozen ocean. The beaches aren't snowy beaches, and we also don't use frozen rivers in those areas. But all of those things, I think you should be able to do yourself. Basically, just add layouts for all of those things, so we can differentiate based on temperature with those biomes. What I want to actually do now is place some special biomes, such as the ice spikes biome. And the way I would like to place them is to just place them on one side of the river and not on the other side. So remember that the difference between the sides of the river is the weirdness values. So positive weirdness values on one side of the river and negative weirdness values on the other side of the river. So we want to actually place a different biome based on the sign of the weirdness value. So in theory, you should also be able to do that with the tools I've already explained to you before. So, but it's maybe a bit annoying to do. So let's see how that would look like. So we'd need a new middle, a new layout, right? So instead of the middle layout, we'd have a middle with special biomes layout. And then we would have to put that layout into a slice. So we need a new slice, like normal, but with special biomes. And then we'd put that slice into the biomes grid in the areas with positive weirdness. And we'd probably also need a new mountain slice. So maybe there's an easier way, and there is, because that's the trick I'm going to show you now. If you select the icebergs biome, right, we opened the middle layout, we selected the icebergs biome for painting, and then now's the trick, we just hold Control while we click on the bottom right triangle of that upper left cell. And if you do that, we just paint a triangle of icebergs. So we basically have two alternate versions of the biomes in that cell. And we do the same for some other special biomes because why not? So now we just need to tell the game when to use which version of the layout, and that's where these A symbols are coming. So you just click on them and you turn them into Bs, and that tells them that in the Snowcapped, that in those columns of the biomes grid, you should always use the bottom right triangle of all slices and layouts. And then, well, you can see on the right, it has already changed. And on one side of the river, you often have different biomes than on the other. So let's actually go back to our terrain and take a look. So this is how it looked before. And now we have some ice spikes, and only on one side of the river and not on the other. All right, so that was basically the last big trick you need to know about Snowcapped, and should be familiar with our thing enough now so you can create your own biome layouts. Well, one small thing we haven't talked about is cave biomes. Cave biomes, as I said in the beginning, based on the depth. So not want to go into too much detail, but in the biome script, we can make a separation based on depth, and then we move it around a bit. So remember, a depth value of 0 is at the surface, and then it increases linearly with depth below the surface. So we want the separation somewhere around 0, slightly above 0. So surface is the surface biomes. And so here we have then two rows. The top one we can place our surface biomes, and below that we can place our cave biomes. So if we go back to our biomes grid, right, we have two rows now, and just because to keep it simple, just painting lush caves everywhere below ground. So we don't see anything on the map on the right yet, and that's because we're just looking at surface biomes. We can use that slider on the left there and move it down a bit, and then we can actually see the cave biomes and the lush caves on the map. Great, so that's it basically for what I wanted to show you today. There are, of course, some things left that could be done to improve this biome layout. We could add more normal biomes, so make that layout grid bigger. We have nearly placed all of the biomes. As I mentioned earlier, the slopes biomes, we haven't placed it all yet. We can do that. Add frozen rivers, beaches, oceans, and of course, more cave biomes. But all of that I'll leave up to you at practice. I think it's actually quite good practice if you want to get some practice with Snowcapped. Can try these things. And right, so if you want to just continue from where we've left out today, the Snowcapped file, as long as the Datapack, the simple terrain Datapack, and this is the final Datapack you can also download from my GitHub on that URL. You'll see there the second one from the top. And right, that's basically everything. And I'm very happy to answer some questions.
Nice. Awesome work on this panel, Jakobsio. It was very informational, and I think it's gonna get a lot of people inspired to work on worldgen. It was a great idea to go through an example. I've shared the link to the file in chat and in Discord chat, so you can click on it. But yeah, we'll go ahead and go through some questions so I can read them off, or if you want to go through them yourself in the Google Doc, then you can.
All right, let's see. Did you invent the term slices and layouts, or did Mojang use these terms in their code? Mojang uses the term slice for some of their slices. So they have a low slice, a mid slice, and a high slice, but then they just call the river one just river and the peak one just peaks. So yeah, I've taken the term slice from that. The term layout, I think I've come up with myself, though that has been a long time ago, so I don't quite remember. Is there a way button to pick-biome instead of always searching on the left sidebar? Yes, there is. I think it's the middle click. You just middle click on the grid and then picks the biome there. For other control help, you can also always just hover over things, and then in the top bar it will show you some control tips. Is Snowcapped open source? Yes, it is. And you can see the URL there on the screen there, the GitHub URL. Do you have any tips on avoiding generating very small, underwhelming biomes? Well, it's tricky. You will never be able to completely avoid small biomes. Well, that was always going to happen with this noise setup. Um, yeah, so it's really just a bit of trial and error. And if you are struggling because you are just placing too many biomes and you don't really have space in the noise, you can always change the density functions or the noise itself to make it bigger so you have more space to place all your biomes. How is this method of biome distribution called? Mojang calls it a multi-noise biome source because it uses multiple noises as inputs for their biome source. Are there any other approaches to this? Not really. So for very simple biome layouts, you can of course do it by hand, but if you want to do anything more complex or match to terrain, it would be way too difficult. And the only other alternative is to write your own generation code. So Snowcapped itself is inspired by how the data gen code by Mojang works. And so Snowcapped is basically just a generalized way of this Mojang code. It allows you to edit it without having to write your own code. Do you have any idea what tools, methods Mojang uses for their own development? They have in the documentation, they basically have those grids as text, and then they manually copy that into their Java code.
Oh wow.
Let's see, what is the Spline Editor used for? The Spline Editor is a pretty outdated. I wouldn't recommend you use it. Basically, in the old days, in 1.18, maybe beginning of 1.19, before we had density functions, basically, we could only modify the terrain using three specific splines. And so I've added an editor for those splines to Snowcapped. But once we got density functions, it became a bit awkward to use them because they now just export as three very specific density functions. So yeah, so I've kept them for now because there really isn't an alternative multi-dimensional spline editor out there. So if any one of you wants to create one of those multi-dimensional spline editors, I'd be very happy because I really want to get rid of the spline editors in Snowcapped. Do you think Mojang will run out of biome space in the current layout? Yeah, I think they will. I think they're already struggling a bit to place their current new biome, the uh, Pale Garden. So yeah, in the future, if they wanna add biomes like once a year, they'll probably run out at some point. So who knows what they'll do then? Maybe they add a new noise. Who knows? Is there a way to create some sheer cliffs where high mountains meet the ocean biomes, but on land with small biomes? I'm not quite sure what is asked here. So if you just want to target these areas where mountains meet the ocean, right? So that's just specific low erosion areas with specific with the beach continentalness values. So you could target those and place your cliff biomes there if that's what you're asking. Yeah, and where that specifically is, the map on the right helps you do that, or helps you figure out which specific values to use for that.
I've tried to make wall biomes, so that's hard. Yeah. I do have a question of my own. So, as someone who's curious about compatibility, what do you think about world gen packs being compatible with each other? Especially in deeper ways that might be really tricky to do like in code, but maybe something you could do on like outside the code through a tool like Weld.
Yeah, that's something I've thought about as well. It would, of course, be really helpful to have compatibility on the layer of layouts or slices in Snowcapped so before the export, rather than having to somehow have rules on injecting these biomes in the compiled export of the dimension file. Um, yeah, it's a pretty tricky topic because even in the modded scene, that problem hasn't really been solved. There are libraries like Terra, Blender that add like another noise on top of all of it to select like which mods that worldgen to use. But even that doesn't really work because it isn't just biomes that you want to blend or like combine. It's also the terrain, so you somehow have to blend between density functions. Um, so it's all really complicated, unfortunately.
Yeah, that sounds pretty complex. I know over at Smith we've talked about compatibility with WorldGen packs by using some of the weld rules that you can dynamically inject something into the JSON files, but I know it sort of requires like some WorldGen experts to kind of come in and make a claim for it or to give an example. So it's something I'm very curious about.
Yeah, right. So, well, especially for biomes, it's going to be tricky if you want to do it on the exported dimension files because of just how big they are, and like so you need some tool to create those weld rules. So it's probably not feasible. It's probably more reasonable to actually do some combination logic on the layer of Snowcapped and then have the export afterwards. Um, and yeah, as I said, the terrain is probably even more tricky because you then have to somehow um, combine density functions of different data packs. And well, maybe we'll get there somewhere time, but yeah, it's all pretty difficult.
Right. I see a question from Curious as well. What's your favorite terrain generation project? Maybe one that specifically used Snowcapped or some of your other tooling.
Mm, well, there are quite a few by now. Mojang Datapack that use Snowcat. Tireless is probably the most obvious example. Um, there's also a rather new one called Cliff Under a Tree that I like that one a lot because they were so kind to actually publish their Snowcap file. So that's one of the examples you can look at if you want to see other people using Snowcap. Um, I really wish more people would do that. I understand some people use the Snowcap files sort of as a trade secret, and I don't really like that, but I guess there's not much I can do to avoid that.
Interesting. Yeah. And then Miso has a question, which I'm also curious about. Will you ever add a way to import a data pack into Snowcat project, even if it's not perfect? I was even thinking about this where you can even export like sort of like how animated Java exports a .aj meta. You could have like a .snowcap to meta file that is included with the data pack. That might be something interesting. So
I don't really see the point of adding it to the data pack automatically. Like if you want to, you can always just include your Snowcap file into your data pack. And well, if people like want to actually hide their Snowcap file, I don't know if I want to like spend a lot of work now on trying some import algorithm that like recreates those layers and slices. Like either they want to publish it or they don't, and that's just their choice.
somebody like maybe you Snowcap or didn't distribute, and you just want to learn more about someone else's pack. But yeah, I can definitely see there's some friction with that sort of support.
Yeah, looking at other people's packs and learning, it's always important, I think, to allow actually. So like really, like if you use Snowcapped to make a datapack and then you publish that datapack. I'd really appreciate if every one of you actually publish their Snowcapped files along with your datapack so that other people can take a look and learn from your work as well.
Yeah, and we got Miss Ode asking if there is dark mode for Snowcapped.
Yeah, there is. You just go to the menu on the top right and then you click on dark mode.
Well, I know we've gone through a lot of questions, so I'm looking up for more, but we maybe want to do like a last question type thing. So if anybody has any questions for Jakobsio or for anything related to Snowcapped, please leave it and we'll go ahead and answer those within the stream. Otherwise, I think we are set. So thank you so much, Jakobsio, for the panel about Snowcap today, and thank you also earlier for the worldgen panel exhibit. So as always, if you are interested in further work, please check out them in our Discord server where you can chat more if you have some more specific questions, or if you want some links to some of the resources that were listed on the slides earlier. There's also the Intro to worldgen booth available in the Aspen Forest biome that you should definitely check out.
Yeah, if you want to learn about all my other tools, I'd be happy to see you in my booth in the Aspen Forest. And if you have any questions about Snowcap while you're using it, please don't hesitate to ping me on Discord. You can use many Discord servers to do that. The main one I'm active in is the MC Configs Discord, and you can see the invite there on screen. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for Summit news, we'll have panels still going on. We have the surprise panel about pixel art coming tomorrow alongside with the fireside chat shortly after, and that will definitely be a fun time. Then we have the final day of Summit coming up on Saturday, so if you have not 100% at Summit and that's something you want to do, then definitely do check that out. Otherwise, I will catch you all at the next panel, and Summit shall continue. Thanks everybody for joining.